Something I've always liked the idea of is passive systems. But most of the videos I've watched on passive systems, they're trying to make their main gaming system passive, which is stupid. And that's because the law of thermodynamics is a thing. So you either have some ridiculously complex and expensive something, like a case cooler or a combination case cooler thing. Alex, I'm looking at you when I say that. Or whatever it is just plain stupid because it's horribly throttling the system. So today I'm going to build a passive home theater PC / Steam gaming streaming system the smart way. What's up everyone, Eric here and welcome to Hardware for Gamers. Now this video is going to be more a proof of concept. This is not going to be its final form. Now to some of you this might be the SMRT Smart because to do something like this you really should be using an APU, but have you seen the prices of APUs recently? I'm using what I have. Now I do have a backup plan if things go bad or sideways or catch on fire. And with that being said, most of the parts that I'll be using are coming from my test bench. So the CPU is a Ryzen 5 3600. The motherboard is an Asrock X470 Taichi. The RAM is two 8GB DIMMs of Corsair Vengeance LPX rated for 3600, but we'll see if we actually run it at 3600. The OS drive is a 250GB Western Digital SATA 3 M.2. The power supply is the Corsair CS 750M. The GPU I'll be using is the HD 5770 because I just need something that can output a 1080p 60 signal, and this can do that. I have removed the stock cooler and I've actually installed the Accelero Twin Turbo 2 from Arctic. Now I am just using the heatsink, so I have actually removed the fan assembly from the heatsink. And for the CPU cooler, I'll be using the Fantex TC14PE. I'm hoping the sheer mass of this thing will work in my favor. Now along with the sheer mass of this thing, I will be undervolting the Ryzen 5 3600. Now depending on how everything goes, I may need to downclock it, but I'm hoping I won't need to do that. And if anyone watching this is wanting to do something similar, I do highly recommend getting a motherboard with a good VRM, which is why I'm using the X470 Taichi. The VRMs are pretty good, and the options within the UEFI should help a fair bit getting a good, stable undervolt. Now before I get into the fireball that this video could turn into, if you like what I'm doing here, can you please like the video and subscribe? It helps out the channel a lot. Speaking of helping out the channel, I also have Amazon associate links. So if you click on one of the links in the description and then add items to your cart and order them, the channel will get a small kickback. Now with all the housekeeping out of the way, I'm quickly going to build the system and then I'm going to run some tests before I start the undervolting process, and that's just to make sure that when I start undervolting, I'm not going to be significantly handicapping the processor. Now, just to let you guys know, I am going to use a fan on the CPU cooler until I get the undervolt locked in. And that's because I'm pretty sure running default or auto settings with no fan is a bad idea. Okay, the undervolting went pretty well. I have the V-core at 1.25 volts. Now I tried going even lower, but when I did, the performance of the CPU started to tank pretty hard, so I kept it at the 1.25 volts. So just to put this into perspective, with the default settings, the Blender render finished in 16 minutes and 40 seconds and had a temperature of 72 Celsius. And with the CPU being undervolted, the Blender render took 16 minutes and 50 seconds and had a temperature of 62 degrees. So yes, there was a 1% drop in performance, but there was also a 10 Celsius drop in temperature, which I am perfectly fine with. So for the testing of the passive system, I wanted to keep things pretty simple, so I only ran 2 tests. I streamed a video on YouTube, and I remote played a game over Steam. Now I did only plan on running these tests for 20 minutes, but I noticed the GPU temperature was still going up after 20 minutes, so I ended up letting it run for another 10, and it got up to 72 Celsius, which is the max temperature for this GPU, so it was thermally throttling. Now the CPU was kind of bouncing between 72, 73 Celsius and 63-ish Celsius, which for the CPU is perfectly fine. And the remote playtest pretty much ended up the same way, but it did happen much faster, and that's because this was the second test, so that the heat sinks were already heat soaked when I ran this test, so everything just happened much faster. Now this does indicate that the heatsink on this GPU is inadequate for this GPU to be running passively. Now admittedly, these parts are not the most efficient, but to be perfectly honest, I never really intended to have this system be fully passive. I always intended to add in 2 fans. Now these fans will be running ridiculously slow at around 200 to 300 RPM, so they will be essentially silent because they are going to be at or below the noise floor of the room. So rerunning the video on YouTube with the 2 fans running, had the CPU peak at around 60 Celsius and then drop down to 52 Celsius, and the GPU maxed out at 55 Celsius. And when playing a game over remote play with the 2 fans, the CPU again would peak at around 60 to 62 Celsius, then drop down to 52 Celsius, and the GPU maxed out at around 54 to 55 Celsius. So that is a 10 Celsius difference for the CPU and a 17 degrees Celsius difference for the GPU, for literally no sound level difference. Does passive cooling make sense? Because as I said before, passive systems are pretty stupid. Unless you're willing to pay some ridiculous amounts of money for some complex case cooler thing, a passive system is not the way to go. Now I understand a passive system can be more of a status thing, and if you're fine spending a whole lot of money, you can make or get a passive system. Just don't expect me to. I don't know about you, but I'm not spending $500 or $600 for some weird ass case so that I can have a passive system. Now the point of this video, for me anyways, is to show how pointless a passive system is. Because by simply adding 2 slow moving fans, I was able to drop the temperature of the CPU and GPU significantly. Now to make a good silent system, you still need to make sure that you have the right parts and that those parts are set up the right way, which is what I was trying to show by undervolting the CPU. Now, if any of you watching are interested in seeing me build a real silent system that is in an actual case and that I can game locally on, just ask for it in the comments. Now, I think that's all I wanted to say about the hardware side of things, but on the software side of things, Steam Remote Play or Steam Link, whatever they're calling it now, is not as polished or as good as I originally thought it was. It is true some games work really well, but other games don't work at all. And you are limited to your Steam library, which kind of sucks. Now on my journey to find out if I was the only one having these issues with remote play, I found something really cool, or at least I think it's really cool. And that is Rainway. Now some of you may already know what Rainway is, but for those of you who don't, it's pretty much a remote desktop, so you get pretty much full access to the system that you're remoting into. Now that system can be in the next room, or across the country, or wherever. Now I don't really want to get into the whole thing with Rainway, but for the purpose of a home theater PC, it works really well. I don't think I would really want to be playing StarCraft 2 or CSGO over it, but for more casual games or single player games, it's pretty good. Now I understand that this is a pretty niche thing, and that most people would never need or care for something like this, but for those of you who have or want a really small and low-powered home theater PC, this is a pretty cool way to go, assuming you already have a gaming rig. Well, that's all I got for this one. If you liked the video, please give it a thumbs up. And if you're still watching, hit the subscribe button and click that bell icon so you get notified whenever I drop a new video. Please follow me on Twitter at HFG_YT. I also have a Discord server. The link is in the description below. And as always, thank you for watching and see you next time.